I'm going to introduce our speakers for tonight. We get to hear from two amazing people, Professor Davarian Baldwin and Michelle Lugalia-Hollon. Dr. Baldwin is the Paul Rather Distinguished Professor of American Studies at Trinity College, and he wrote the really fascinating 2021 book, In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower, How Universities Are Plundering Our Cities, including a great chapter on the University of Chicago that everyone should read. And Ms. Lugalia-Hollon is a public health advocate who has worked with nonprofits and governments in Chicago, Boston, and Texas. She's also served as the director of policy for San Antonio's mayor from 2020 to 2022. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Baldwin and Ms. Lugalia-Hollon, and I'll turn it over to you guys. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Ling. That was amazing. I'm fired up. Feels so good connecting back to folks from the campus, and I feel really honored to have been invited to be a part of this conversation. I want to take a facilitator privilege and shout out to two people who are in the room with us tonight, Susan Avila and Mildred Williamson, who taught me everything that I ever needed to know about being the change that I wanted to be in the world. And I am so happy that they're here with us today. And I look forward to hearing their questions and everybody else's as we get into this book. If you haven't read the book or even a chapter about the 800-pound gargoyle, this is an incredible book. It's very well and beautifully written. I couldn't stop reading it, and I learned so much more than I anticipated about the role that universities are playing when it comes to the development of our cities, and how over a period of time, in many ways, we have probably undervalued and underappreciated their reach and their intention if we were to track where they started and where they are now. Davarian, thank you so much for writing this book. And I'm so excited about these questions that we're going to dive in together. And I'm going to go to the first one so we can use our time well. And everyone hopefully will have some chance for folks to ask questions if you have any specifics that we won't get to today. So first question, Professor Baldwin, Davarian, as he's asked us to call him. I'll go back and forth because the book brings that out in me. Your book explores the impact of universities on the communities that they exist in. Can you please highlight the universal patterns that you've observed from your studies across the nation?
Well, Michelle, first of all, I just want to say thank you for being here in conversation with me. I'm going to take my presenter privilege to say thank you. I appreciate your fellowship with me in conversation. It's great to see Alex here. The book wouldn't have been able to be written without him taking the time to speak with me at a time when, people were leery about speaking about these issues, especially with this book that was going to have a broad reach. And Alex remained fearless in trying to put me in the right direction on things that need to be said. Because I also want to shout out some of the organizations in Chicago that made this work possible. STOP, Invisible Institute, Blacks in Green, Reparations at the University of Chicago, Asada's Daughters, Movement for Black Lives, the organization for the CBA, the list goes on and on and on, that this project wouldn't have been possible without those social movement organizations that had one foot in the university and one foot out of it, that had the courage and will to speak to what they saw and not just what we wanted people to see. So I thank y'all all. And a lot of this is driven by student and community movement power. It wouldn't be possible without you. We start modest, but we end strong. And so we just want to hold light for that. And that includes, and that puts STOP at the center of the story. So if you got that, itchy trigger finger, let it run and press send on those donations to support STOP. Do it now before you think second ways. Do it while it's at the front of your heart, at the front of your head. Just, follow the impulse. So having said that, yeah, there are some things. I mean, when I first started this project, it started in Chicago. The book opens on the South Side. I was at the Regenstein Library doing, what wonky academics do. I was in the archives doing research. And when I stepped out in a cold December day, about over 15 years ago, history stared me straight in the face. It hit me straight in the face because there were residents from Bronzeville and other community and students who were protesting the purchase and relocation of the Checkerboard Lounge. So this shows you how old I am. This is a bit ago. And I, being academic, I did my research and saw what's going on? And people pit me to the game saying this purchase is just the tip of the iceberg to demonstrate the longstanding control that UChicago holds, not just over Hyde Park, but over all the South Side in profound ways. So when I went back to New York and Boston telling the story, my good colleague and advisor, Andrew Ross, who had just written a book about Phoenix, was like, yo, the University of Phoenix just built a downtown, Arizona State University has built a downtown campus in Phoenix, Arizona. Go there. And then people were like, you went to NYU. How could you not talk about NYU and Columbia fighting over dominance over the island of Manhattan? And the list just kept going on and on and on. St. Louis, Washington University in St. Louis, University of Miami, University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, USC in South Central, Portland State, Yale in New Haven, Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, UPenn in West Philadelphia, the list, Georgia Tech in Atlanta, just the list kept, Virginia Commonwealth in Richmond. The list just kept going on and on and on. And, it just was phenomenal to me, the larger story, as you pointed out, the fact that right before our eyes, it was colleges, and with the fall of factories in America, in a country where factories have moved to the global South, the smooth degree to which universities and the medical centers have moved to the center of our political economy. This is not, my epilogue is called The Ivory Tower is Dead for a reason, because this is not an institution that is separated from the world as just kind of a training ground for the future. It is the staging ground for the present when it comes to our today's political economy. And it just blew my mind when I realized that it's schools and their medical centers that are the biggest employers, real estate holders, healthcare providers, and you'll know this in Hyde Park, biggest policing agents in major cities and college towns all across the country. And that has been the dominant national trend. And we're seeing the fallout of this right now around graduate, student, and faculty labor organizing, because as much as they're fighting for better wages, they're also fighting in Michigan. They're fighting against armed policing, right? In other parts of in California, they liberated the cafeterias because they're facing housing and food insecurity. So, it's very clear that while we see these institutions and while they sell themselves as just simply schoolhouse, I call it the myth of the schoolhouse, they have this encroaching and pervasive impact on our lives that have nothing to do with teaching classes. And even if you're not directly affiliated with the university, it's these institutions that set land values. They dictate the wage ceiling. Mm-hmm. They establish healthcare practices. And of course, they provide, or they become forms of non-public governance by the way they police non-university affiliated neighborhoods. This is a behemoth. This is strong. This is powerful. So when I say in the shadow of the Ivory Tower, we are all, if you live in a city or town, we are all in the shadows of Ivory Tower. This is not just a UChicago phenomenon, but UChicago has been the model.
Yes.
How to do it across the country.
Well, let's get into that a little bit, because I was surprised at that. I know the University of Chicago is toasted for being very good at very many things. And like you said in your book, we hide behind this whole idea of the life of the mind, and our that the University of Chicago was really about producing this great, academics and leading in all these ways. But one way that I didn't know very specifically, that you go into so much detail in your book, is how much of a pioneer the University of Chicago has been in shaping and using urban renewal policies to set the tone for other universities across the nation to do what they have truly exemplified. And you talk about the development of the neighborhoods around it over time and their influence in federal policies. And then you also specifically talk about how the campus policing model and strategy is uplifted by other colleges and universities in the field as one of the most successful models, which I was just shocked and terrified to learn. Can you summarize what you observed at UChicago, and if there's anything particularly unique about U of C's treatment and its relationship with the South Side of Chicago that really makes it stand out as an institution?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you so much, Michelle. Just real quick on the history piece, UChicago, we probably all know about by now, because it became in vogue a couple of years ago, about redlining or urban renewal and the way in which bridges and highways cut up our communities, particularly targeted communities of color in cities from Miami to New York to San Francisco. But what we're now, and what my research revealed with a few others, is the degree to which higher education institutions played a role in that. When the urban renewal policy, the federal policy was amended, the Housing Act of 49 was amended 10 years after. And one of the major lobbyists to amend this policy was the University of Chicago. And they were leaders amongst urban universities like NYU, Columbia, UC Berkeley, and others to argue that for every dollar that a city contributes to urban renewal, the federal government would contribute $2 if that project was organized around university-led urban renewal, which in many cases meant the demolition of Black and brown communities that were surrounding campuses at an era that we sometimes call the period of urban crisis. The moment when white tax holders and taxpayers were leaving to go to suburbs, and Black and brown folk were not able to follow, and universities were feeling trapped and encroached. And so the ability to demolish well-kept, well-designed, middle-class and working-class Black neighborhoods to create an institutional buffer around these campuses was pioneered at the University of Chicago at the same time that the university was pioneering its Cold War practices around the Manhattan Project and nuclear weapon design. These things were happening simultaneously, and the Cold War language of containment was used at the international level and used at the domestic level. Contain these Black and brown folks and contain communism. Those were being spoken of at the University of Chicago in the same conversations. So then fast forward to the 21st century, this is a period where now it's hip to be in cities. So the university had pioneered turning its back, before your time, most of y'all, but maybe some of the older heads in the room will remember those t-shirts that said, UChicago, the place where fun comes to die. Because by design, they had gotten rid of all commercial development to prevent racial mixing, to create this institutional and commercial buffer around Hyde Park. But then by the 90s, you had people coming back into the city wanting the amenities of coffee shops and fully wired neighborhoods, walkability, all the things we talk about, the new urbanism. And UChicago was caught flat-footed. So then this becomes the beginnings of retrofitting and urban redesigning Harper Court. This becomes the beginning of encroaching and stretching its feet into Woodlawn, moving past the 60th Street DMZ that was created by TWO and going to 61st, the 62nd, and building dorms down there. And so one way in which that was maintained was by creating a powerful, badass police force to become the front lines on laying the ground, literally, for university expansion in the brick and mortar realm to follow. I call it the velvet hammer approach. First comes the police to set the tone on behavior, and then followed with the buildings and grounds to reassert and reestablish university footholds in the surrounding communities to build these zones of affordability, not affordability, but walkability and fun for the families of researchers and the students that would come to have that urban university experience. And so campuses all over the country began to follow, like they did in the 1950s and 60s around urban renewal. The University of Chicago became a leader in policing. Many people didn't know that the university had created a memorandum of understanding with the city that wherever there is a university building, that would be where the university police would extend its jurisdiction. And then being a private police force, being a private university, the Freedom of Information Act exemption that private institutions hold is transferred to UChicago's police force. So the irony is that you have a private police force with public authority to arrest and detain,
right,
with no public oversight.
Mm-hmm.
And so schools like Johns Hopkins and UC Berkeley and Rice University and others, UPenn, all look at the University of Chicago today as a model on how to do police gentrification or development through policing.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah, that truly it was appalling to learn that at that level of detail, but to really see the interaction and how the University of Chicago involved itself in
right.
municipal, state, and federal policy to make sure that legislatively they had the protection and the resources to do exactly what they wanted to do, with or without the consent or the informed participation of its residents around them. And if you want to DM me who Matthew from the Community of Engagement Office was, let me know. You don't have to tell anybody else, but if you read the book, if you know, you know, because yes, Matthew told us everything we needed to know.
He gave us all the receipts. And real quickly, I just want to say real quickly,
yes,
he read an early piece that I wrote, and we talked, and he just put it down. He's like, when developers come to the South Side, they don't go to City Hall first to get permission to develop. They come to the UChicago. That's the power the university holds over the South Side. And that's another way in which they pioneer. Their dominance over the South Side is unprecedented.
And their influence, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take us to our last question here from Frederick Douglass. We all know that power concedes nothing without a demand.
Yeah.
In your book, there are many examples of residents and oftentimes students, like you mentioned earlier, rising up to resist the policies and advances of the featured universities, sometimes with success or otherwise. We know, like with organizations like STOP, years-long push for the University of Chicago to establish a trauma center, which you discuss in your book, as well as examples from Baltimore and New York, that it is possible for folks to come together and rise up and sometimes to win. It may not happen right away, but it certainly is possible. So how can people like us around within who are a part of powerful universities hold them accountable? What have you seen work? And can you share some examples that you focused on in your book?
Sure. I mean, that's a great question. Not only have I seen things, but I've been blessed to be a part of things where, a lot of times academics, we have the aspirations to have social impact. I've seen in the moment, community and labor student groups have embraced this work and brought me into their work where my research could help serve social movements. So like I mentioned earlier, University of Michigan right now, the graduate students are organizing for labor demands, but they're envisioning what I call the new shop floor. Because the university is so impactful in all parts of our lives, therefore the shop floor includes not just the work site, but the places where workers, graduate workers, faculty live, play, and take their children. So the new shop floor is the entire city. And so what they're arguing for, part of their labor demands, is for unarmed trauma workers and healthcare workers to replace armed campus police. That's powerful. If you've been following the labor movement right now for graduate students and faculty at Rutgers University, they've reached out to me to talk about how to incorporate community benefits into their labor campaign. They just recently won, it's not fully finalized, but they've agreed upon a $600,000 earmark for the union to organize a community engagement project in the neighborhoods that surround Rutgers University, New Brunswick. These are amazing things. I was a part of the success, modest success, of years of organizing with New Haven Rising in New Haven, Connecticut, for an additional tax relief of $10 million a year from Yale University over the next 6 years, because they are the biggest landholder and behemoth, in even more so than the South Side in New Haven, Connecticut. Their police force has jurisdiction over the entire city of New Haven. And as the biggest landholder, and as you know, university land is tax exempt. So their control has a huge impact on things like public schools, snow removal, trash removal, the maintenance of the electrical grid. When these major landholders like universities don't pay in, it has a profound impact on the livelihood of long-term residents. Other campaigns at Princeton University, residents sued Princeton when they found out that their property taxes were going up, but there had been no improvements in their neighborhoods. And so they sued Princeton because they found out that the reason why that was happening is because Princeton buildings were hosting for-profit research by the pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly. And so these universities were engaging with these private investors and using their university land as a tax shelter for private investors and passing the burden on to the residents in the form of taxation. Mm-hmm. That was another success. So these are things that have been going on. At the end of my book, I talk about the success of the University of Winnipeg, and it's always Canada, right? And it's not a full success, but they've been able to do things like build out housing that includes residents and students. at 4 different levels, from
Mhm.
premium to market to affordable to rent geared to income. Their public spaces, including the rec center, are governed by a community charter, which gives community organizations prime first choice choices on when to occupy common university spaces.
Yeah.
Not at 8 in the morning or 12 at midnight, but at prime peak hours of the day. They're
Mhm.
food service companies. They fired Aramark or Sedesco or Marriott or Chartwells or whoever y'all got, right? And created their own diversity foods, which offers living wages for residents that they call difficult to employ, LGBTQ+, recently incarcerated, what they call new Canadian or immigrant groups, refugees.
Mhm.
And they are moving from wages to profit sharing. On the food service side, 60% of their raw materials are collected from small farms within a 100-kilometer radius. I've
Mhm.
been to the kitchen. Every workstation has a compost bin, and they send out their cooking oil to be converted into biodiesel. There
Wow.
was a powerful moment during the pandemic when UChicago was giving out loans, small business loans, to communities, to businesses of color. And they also were taking the excess food that's thrown away every day in the cafeterias and converting it into healthy meals for communities in need. When the
Mhm.
pandemic was over, they abandoned those campaigns.
Mhm.
Y'all need to remind them that's easy, low-hanging fruit. When I
Mhm.
told this story to a young white brother at UPenn, a medical student who's they're already busy,
Yeah.
right? But what did he do? He took that story I told him about the cafeteria and he created, with the Democratic Socialist group in Philadelphia, created their own refrigerated food redistribution program that the university gets the benefit from, the publicity, but offers no financial support.
Mhm.
So y'all need to get out there and do the work, right?
Yes.
Chicago is a hotbed for UChicago's draconian policies, but it's also a hotbed for responses, from the Holman Square uprising against police torture and trying to change curriculum, to reparation at the University of Chicago, to the community benefits agreement, to the procurement of 20 lots.
Mhm.
Y'all are also at the forefront, but this work
Right.
can be expanded.
Absolutely.
So it's really
Absolutely.
powerful.
Thank you so much. And once again, In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower is the brilliant book that Davarian has blessed us with. It's incredible. I hope somebody's teaching this book in a course somewhere in both the grad students college and also the university, and pick it up if you haven't. We'll have a chance to talk to Davarian some more later on in the program. My family, the Lugalia-Hollon family, I happen to marry a UChicago alum. Apparently the statistics are true and real, and we will be committing $50 a month to stop to support Alex's work and our belief and our respect for the time that he has committed to this organization since he was in college. And so proud of the work that Stop continues to do. And we look forward to hearing more about y'all's commitment to the work that Davarian has inspired us to think about in his talk today. And let's not let history repeat itself.
Yes.
And I'm going to pass it now over to
Michelle,
either
been
Sophie or Ling. Sorry,
I've been
yes,
so
Davarian.
inspired by what you just said, and thank you so
Yes.
much for your work and for being here. And I'm gonna piggyback your financial contribution, and because my book and my work wouldn't be possible without Stop, so I'm gonna donate a one flat time fee of a donation of $1,000 to Stop, to continue the ball rolling, because it wouldn't be possible. So thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody, for the work you've been doing. Appreciate you.